Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Tens of thousands of Muslims took to the streets in several countries to protest the republication of blasphemous caricatures in France. From Somalia to Pakistan and Palestine to Indonesia, thousands of faithful called for a boycott of French products. The widespread protests coincide with the birth anniversary of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Pakistan's Foreign Office has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to lodge a protest over ceasefire violations along the line of control. Foreign Office spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry says 2 civilians were wounded in unprovoked firing in Nizapur and Rakhchikri sectors. He said Indian occupation forces have committed 2,580 ceasefire violations and killed 19 civilians this year. The Human Rights Watch has endorsed Azerbaijan's statement that Armenian forces used banned cluster bombs in an attack in Barda city. It urged Yerevan to stop using cluster bombs in the ongoing conflict over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. At least 21 civilians were killed and 70 others injured in the attack on October 28. The world has surpassed 45 million new coronavirus cases with more than 1.18 million deaths. The U.S. has reported record daily COVID-19 cases with more than 87,000 people testing positive overnight. The death toll in the country has exceeded 228,000, while the caseload is approaching 9 million. Meanwhile, India has recorded more than 48,000 daily coronavirus cases with over 8 million confirmed infections. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 20 more lives, pushing the tally to 6,795. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. Tens of thousands of Muslims took to the streets in several countries to protest the republication of blasphemous caricatures in France. From Somalia to Pakistan and Palestine to Indonesia, thousands of faithful called for a boycott of French products. In Pakistan's eastern city of Lahore, around 2,000 worshippers took to the streets after Friday prayers and raised anti-France slogans. In Jerusalem, hundreds of Palestinians protested against France outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The widespread protests coincide with the birth anniversary of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Pakistan's Foreign Office has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to protest ceasefire violations along the line of control. The summoning comes a day after 2 people were wounded in unprovoked Indian firing in Nizapur and Rakhchikri sectors. Foreign Office spokesman Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said ceasefire violations are posing a threat to regional peace and stability. He urged India to respect the 2003 ceasefire agreement. 19 people have been martyred in over 2,500 ceasefire violations by India this year so far. And now the Human Rights Watch has endorsed Azerbaijan's statement that Armenian forces used banned cluster bombs in an attack on Barda city. At least 21 civilians were killed and 70 others injured in the attack on October 28th. The watchdog said it analyzed photos of cluster munition remains taken by international and local journalists at and near the attack scene. It concluded that Armenian forces either carried out the attack or supplied the munitions to Nagorno-Karabakh forces. The Human Rights Watch urged Yerevan to stop using cluster bombs in the ongoing conflict over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Over 900 people have been killed in the ongoing clashes since the clashes began on the 27th of September. The Trump administration has informally notified Congress of its plan to sell F-35 jets to the United Arab Emirates. House Committee on Foreign Affairs Chair Eliot Engel has objected to the proposal, saying it will affect Israel's military edge in the region. In a statement, Engel said the transfer of these weapons to one Middle Eastern state will generate demands from others in the region. He added this technology must be protected from U.S. adversaries like Russia and China, who are active in the Gulf. He questioned if it was wise to pay a price for Arab-Israel normalization with the infusion of advanced weapons. Earlier, Israel withdrew its objections against the planned F-35 sale to UAE after securing guarantees. And now moving on, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on 8 entities over sale and purchase of Iranian petrochemical products. The Treasury Department said Iran uses the petroleum sector to fund destabilizing activities across the Middle East. It said the entities based in Iran, China, and Singapore engaged in transactions facilitated by Iranian firms. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the U.S. will target any revenue source that Tehran uses to fund terrorist groups. The latest sanctions come less than a week before the U.S. presidential election on November 3rd. Now, Chinese and U.S. military chiefs have held talks on crisis communication this week amid tensions in the South China Sea. Beijing's Defense Ministry spokesman Wu Qian said Washington denied reports of a possible drone attack. He also quoted U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper as saying that Washington has no intention of creating a military crisis with Beijing. The spokesman said both militaries will further exchange views on maritime security before the end of the year. The recent exchange came as Esper toured Asia with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. During the tour, both officials urged countries to cooperate with the U.S. to confront what they call security threats posed by China. However, Beijing has criticized Washington's position as a Cold War mentality. Moving on, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has wrapped up a 5-nation tour of Asia in Vietnam with a call for unity to counter China's influence. Pompeo visited Hanoi presumably to celebrate 25 years of U.S.-Vietnam relations. But during his previous stops in India, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and Indonesia, Pompeo's main aim was to shore up support for pushing back on China. He said Washington looks forward to building mutual ties and to make the region peaceful and prosperous. China has already warned Pompeo against sowing discord among Asian countries. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 45 million, with over 1.18 million deaths. This comes as the U.S. reported record daily cases, with more than 87,000 people testing positive overnight. Meanwhile, India has recorded more than 48,000 infections overnight, taking the caseload to over 8 million. More in the following report.
In a complete reversal of recovery, the coronavirus is tormenting nations beyond hope as cases surge. A recently traced variant of the virus originating in Spain is being considered responsible for the devastating second wave in Europe. To fight the virus, European Union leaders have agreed to increase coordination on testing and vaccination strategies.
Numbers of cases are rising, numbers of hospitalization are rising. Numbers of deaths are rising, not as fast, fortunately, because we understand better today how to treat COVID patients and how to deal with the disease. But the spread of the virus will overwhelm our healthcare systems if we do not act urgently.
The number of confirmed cases in the United States is approaching the 9 million mark, with over 228,000 deaths. But President Donald Trump has ruled out any possibility of reimposing a nationwide lockdown. Mexico has the 4th highest COVID-19 death rate in the world, with its number of infections nearing 1 million. Lockdown restrictions have forced Mexicans to observe their traditional Day of the Dead earlier than the marked date.
Different. It is going to be different because in my house we always go out, dress up and go to parties. And now it is not going to be possible, but it is temporary. Let's hope that next year it can be done. The only thing we can do is wait for the pandemic to end, for it to be over.
Over in Asia, India remains the virus hotspot. 563 more people have died in India overnight, pushing the count to over 121,000. Mainland China reported 25 new COVID-19 cases, down from 47 a day earlier. Japan has eased travel curbs for China, Australia, South Korea, and 6 other countries and regions as Tokyo steps up efforts to revive its economy.
And in Pakistan, over 1,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19 overnight. The virus has claimed 20 lives in the last day, pushing the death toll to 6,795. The health ministry says there are over 11,800 active coronavirus cases in the country. It said out of over 332,000 countrywide cases, more than 313,000 have recovered so far. Officials added over 145,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported more than 103,000 cases. In the capital city of Islamabad, some 19,500 people have been infected so far. And Pakistan's envoy to the UN says new technologies are crucial in the fight against COVID-19 and climate change. Speaking at a virtual dialogue on technological and science-based solutions to the COVID-19 challenge, Munir Akram said it is technology that enabled the world to communicate in this crucial period of the pandemic. Akram stressed on the need for sharing scientific research universally so no state is left behind. He suggested the UN Commission on Science should align intellectual property with sustainable development goals. The envoy added digital cooperation should be the goal of the UN in order to remove gaps. In the United States, President Donald Trump and his Democratic rival Joe Biden will hold campaigns across the Midwest states ahead of the final weekend before Election Day. Joe Biden is so far leading President Donald Trump in the national polls for the presidential election scheduled for the 3rd of November. Earlier, both candidates showcased their contrasting approaches to the pandemic as they rallied supporters in the swing state of Florida. Florida is a must-win for Trump, and a key opinion poll average shows him just 1.4 points behind Biden. Over 81 million people have already voted, setting the U.S. on course for its highest electoral turnout rate in more than a century. India is fast losing its status as a democracy due to the crippling crackdown on media and civil society. In a report, a Sweden-based research institute said India is one of the largest countries verging towards autocracy. The institute said press freedom in India is declining with increased slapping of sedition and defamation charges on journalists. Several international bodies have urged the Indian government to stop using sedition laws to silence the media. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has asked the Indian government to immediately halt its suppression of dissent in occupied Kashmir. Moving on, Libya's High Council of State has urged the government of National Accord's chief Fayez al-Sarraj to postpone his resignation. In a letter, Council Chairman Khalid al-Mishri pressed al-Sarraj to wait until a new presidential council is elected. Al-Mishri cited a Schirat agreement article that the resignation of Prime Minister leads to the dissolution of the cabinet. He said al-Sarraj must stay to avoid a political vacuum amid the upcoming Libyan political dialogue forum. The GNA Parliament has also called on al-Sarraj to postpone plans to step down for higher interest. The UN-mediated dialogue forum is scheduled to take place on November 9th, following the implementation of a ceasefire in Libya. And Turkey will host the acting special representative of the UN Secretary General for Libya, Stephanie Turco, today. In a statement, Ankara said Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu and Williams will discuss the recent developments in Libya. Earlier, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres registered a deal between Turkey and the UN-recognized government in Libya. It aims to protect the rights of both countries in the Mediterranean. In Malaysia, a key party in the ruling alliance has called for early elections once the COVID-19 pandemic is under control. The United Malays National Organization says the people's mandate should be returned to form a stable government. In a statement, the UNMO also vowed to support the government's 2021 budget in Parliament next week. The country's general elections are scheduled for September 2023. Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin has been under pressure to lift an economy battered by the pandemic. Last month, UNMO said some party lawmakers supported opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim's bid to be prime minister. More news after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The UN has proposed a plan to gradually withdraw the 18,000-strong peacekeeping forces from Congo. This comes a day after militants killed 19 people and burnt down 40 houses and a church in the country's troubled eastern region. In a letter to the Security Council, UN Chief Antonio Guterres presented a timeline to transfer powers to the Congolese government. He said the peacekeeping mission and the Congolese government agreed on the broad strategy on October 19th. The UN chief said both sides will continue a dialogue to create conditions for a successful and responsible exit of the mission. Britain's opposition Labour Party has suspended its former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, over his reaction to a report on anti-Semitism. The human rights watchdog held Labour responsible for discrimination during Corbyn's years in charge. Corbyn has said the problem of anti-Semitism within the party had been dramatically overstated, but the party said he was being suspended for a failure to retract his words. Corbyn reacted by calling the move political and promised to strongly contest it. Labour leader Keir Starmer has promised to implement the report's recommendation as soon as possible. New Zealand has voted to legalize the use of euthanasia, but is on course to reject the recreational use of cannabis. The vote makes it the 7th country in the world to legalize assisted dying. People voted on the 2 referendums this month while casting ballots during a general election. Re-elected Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern backed both bills in her campaign. The Electoral Commission says preliminary results show over 65% of voters were in favor of the end-of-life choice bill. But when it came to the question of legalizing marijuana, the Commission said 53.1% opposed it. The UN says at least 140 Europe-bound migrants have drowned off the coast of Senegal after their boat was capsized. In a statement, the UN Migration Agency said it was the deadliest shipwreck recorded this year. The International Organization for Migration said the boat carrying 200 people sank after leaving the town of Mbour. It said the Senegalese and Spanish navies rescued some 60 people. The agency said migrant arrivals in the Canary Islands from West Africa have quadrupled this year. The surge has happened as other routes through Libya or Algeria are blocked off by tougher controls. And in New York, strong winds caused a crane to spin, making debris fall from a skyscraper in Manhattan. New York Fire Department says there is still some debris precariously hanging from the building. In a statement, the FDNY said no one was injured in the incident. It said rescuers found a tower crane with a cable hanging from the boom that was little lower than it should have been. It said the crane was secured, but it added the operation to clear the debris is going to be a long one due to the wind and fog conditions. And now on to business. Most European markets are trading lower as tightening coronavirus restrictions weigh on investor sentiment. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 has slipped fractionally, with retail stocks shedding nearly 1%. London's FTSE and Frankfurt's DAX slipped close to 0.5%. The FTSE MIB in Italy shed nearly 0.5%, while the CAC 40 in Paris gained marginally. Earlier, Asian markets declined over the global rise of COVID-19 and the unlikelihood of a vaccine soon. The European Commission says a deal on fisheries and state subsidies are the two critical issues in Brexit talks with Britain. In a news conference, President Ursula von der Leyen said the bloc is making good progress in talks, but she called for more headway on two important issues of level playing field and fisheries. The European Commission president said the bloc aims to build a fair system for both sides. This comes only a day after Britain said it will not back down on its demands over fisheries. London left the bloc on the 31st of January, but entered a transition period until the end of this year. Now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.